Have you ever tried to explain yourself to someone only to walk away feeling more confused than when you started? You replay the conversation and you wonder, what did I say wrong? And somehow you end up questioning yourself. If this sounds familiar, this video is for you because the problem usually isn't that you didn't explain clearly enough. It's that you were trying to be understood by a narcissist in a dynamic that doesn't actually allow for mutual understanding. And once you see that, everything shifts. In the last video, we talked about the 9 questions that tend to stop a narcissistic person in their tracks. Not because the questions are complicated, but because of what they expose. And a lot of you asked the next very reasonable question, okay, but how do I actually respond when this happens? So that's what this video is about. It's not about fixing them. It's not about winning an argument, but it's about learning how to respond in a way that keeps you grounded, clear, and less emotionally drained when someone avoids, deflects, shuts down, or twists the conversation. Because once you understand the patterns, you can pause instead of reacting, and that pause gives you a choice. And choosing how you engage is how you stop getting pulled into confusion and start protecting your own peace. Hi, I'm Jill. I've been working as a psychotherapist for over 25 years, and this space is really about making sense of why we think, feel, and relate to others the way we do. We talk a lot about how early experiences like emotional neglect or childhood trauma can quietly shape our adult relationships, why we sometimes end up giving more understanding or patience than is actually healthy, especially with people who show narcissistic traits. If you're returning, thank you for coming back. It means a lot to have you here. And if this is your first time, welcome. I'm really glad you found this space. If this video resonates with you, liking and subscribing helps the channel and lets the algorithm know this video is worth sharing, and I would really, really appreciate it. Thank you. The first of the 9 questions was about when a narcissist goes silent. So if the situation is that you name something real that's happening, a concern, a feeling, a boundary, and suddenly silence, no response, no acknowledgement, no repair. For many people, this moment is deeply unsettling, not because you've done something wrong, but because silence activates uncertainty. It creates a sense of disconnection that the nervous system experiences as a threat. Now, our old survival response might sound like, what did I do wrong? Should I reach out? Did I push too hard? Did I talk too much? That response makes sense. Many of us learned early on that connection could disappear without warning, and that it was our job to restore it. So when silence appears, the body moves quickly towards repair, appeasement, or self-doubt. The grounded shift begins when you notice the silence and you don't chase it. You pause, you feel your breath, you feel your body, you feel your feet on the ground. Instead of scanning for what you should say next, you stay with yourself. You gently remind yourself, silence is information. I don't need to decode it. Because this kind of silence isn't neutral. It's not rest, it's not regulation, it's withdrawal. And withdrawal tells you something important about the other person's capacity, not about your worth. You may feel the urge to explain, soften, or reassure. You may feel the pull to re-enter the conversation just to restore the connection, but instead choose not to abandon yourself. You allow the silence to just stand. So the action point here is do not pursue clarity from someone who withdraws instead of engaging. Clarity can't be created by one person alone, and chasing someone who disappears often leads to self-erasure. Now, self-erasure is when we slowly disconnect from our own needs, feelings, values, or identity in order to keep our relationship, maintain safety, or avoid conflict. And it rarely brings resolution. Sometimes the most self-respecting response is letting the silence speak and choosing to remain present, steady, and intact inside yourself. That choice to stay with yourself rather than chase connection is where regulation and self-trust begins. On to the second question. It was all about why narcissists dismiss others' perspectives. So if the situation was that you share something that matters to you, a thought, a feeling, a different way of seeing things, and it's brushed aside, discounted, minimized, corrected, or treated as if it carries less weight, sometimes it could be a subtle eye roll, a sigh, a quick interruption, or sometimes it's overt, like, that's not how it is, or you're overthinking this. Now, our old survival response might sound like, let me explain this better. Maybe if I say it more clearly, they'll understand. Maybe I'm not making sense. That response does make sense because many of us learned early on that being heard required clarity, calmness, or emotional restraint. So when we're dismissed, we instinctively reach for more explanation, hoping understanding will finally arrive. The grounded response begins when you stop persuading. You notice something important. There isn't curiosity from the other person's side. It's not confusion, it's not misunderstanding, but it's a closed stance. And instead of pushing harder, you pause and again you feel your body, your breath, your feet on the ground. You quietly acknowledge this isn't a lack of clarity, it's a lack of openness. And you don't fight that reality. You don't argue your credibility. You don't defend your intelligence or your emotional depth. You don't keep offering pieces of yourself to be evaluated or devalued. Because being dismissed doesn't mean you're wrong. It means the space you're in isn't relationally safe. So the main point here is your perspective doesn't need permission to exist. And dismissal doesn't mean you're wrong. It means that space you're in is not safe for dialogue. And respect isn't something you convince someone to give you. When dialogue becomes one-sided, stepping back isn't giving up. Sometimes the most grounding thing you can do is recognize when your voice deserves a different room. As we go on, I want to share something that often brings a lot of relief, especially if you have spent years trying to respond the right way, whatever that is, and still feel unsettled. And we'll come back to that in a moment. So the third question was why they push you away and then they pull you back in. So imagine the situation that there's criticism, emotional distance, withdrawal, and then just when you start to steady yourself, they reappear with a lovely message, a softening, a moment of attention and love that feels like such a relief. This push away, pull back pattern can be one of the most confusing dynamics to live inside of, not because you're naive, but because it activates hope. It touches that part of you that still believes closeness might arrive this time if you respond correctly. The old survival response often sounds like, maybe this time it'll be different. Maybe they've reflected. Maybe we've finally turned a corner. And it makes sense. Our human nervous systems are wired towards connection. And intermittent warmth and reinforcement can feel especially powerful when it follows an emotional distance. I'm curious, when that push away, pull back pattern shows up for you, what do you usually do? Do you tend to reach out, wait, explain, or pull back? If you feel comfortable, let me know in the comments. And it just helps us all to know that others may be feeling the same. So the grounded shift we need begins when you stop personalizing the pattern. You start to see the push-pull isn't caused by anything you did or failed to do. It's not a response to your worth, your effort, or your capacity to love. It's a relational pattern, and one that creates intensity without stability. Instead of reacting to the other, pause, choose your pace, choose your space. You notice how your body feels, not just in the moment of reconnection, but actually after it. The tension, the waiting, the vigilance, the uncertainty that follows. These all matter. It's information that's worth paying attention to. So the action point here is respond to consistency, not intensity. Consistency builds safety. Intensity creates activation of the nervous system, fight, flight, freeze, fawn. And this is important to name clearly. This push away, pull back dynamic is not intimacy, it's not closeness, it's not attachment growing deeper, it's unpredictability. Before moving forward, I'd also invite you to gently hold this question. Is this okay for me? Is entering and re-entering the dance actually nourishing? Or would stepping out of it bring relief? And I want to say this clearly because it's easy for us to forget. That pattern is not about love or connection. It's not about reflection of your importance. It's not about you. It's about regulation and control by the other and not intimacy. Sometimes the most self-respecting choice is not learning how to dance better, but choosing to step off the dance floor altogether. Question number 4 was why they cannot admit a mistake, why they can't be wrong. So if the situation was that something happens and there's a rupture or there's an argument, a misstep, a moment where repair would in a healthy relationship follow, and it doesn't because actually accountability never arrives by the other person. Instead, there's explanations, deflections, justifications, or silence that quietly shifts the focus away from what actually happened. Our old survival response might sound like, if I explain this gently enough, they'll understand. If I stay calm, if I stay reasonable, they'll finally see it. And that makes sense because many people learn that conflict could only be survived by being careful, by accommodating, by being emotionally restrained, by people pleasing. So when accountability is missing, the instinct is to soften, clarify, or carry more of the emotional load in the hope of restoring balance. The grounded response begins when you realise the need for admission. You notice the pattern, not once, but over time. You recognise that the issue isn't your wording, it isn't your tone, it isn't your timing. It's that taking responsibility feels threatening to the other person. And instead of continuing to organise reality around their comfort, you just stop. You stop rephrasing the truth to make it easier to swallow. You stop shrinking the impact so it doesn't feel so confronting. You stop carrying the weight of repair alone. Not because you don't care, but because your nervous system cannot stay regulated in a dynamic where accountability never comes. So the main action point here is that you are allowed to trust what you know is true without needing them to confirm it for you. Not every truth needs agreement. Not every rupture needs repair. And here's something important to remember. Your sense of safety does not depend on their ability to admit fault. Sometimes regulation comes from resolution, sometimes it doesn't, but it often comes from clarity, from seeing what is and choosing how close you allow yourself to be to that person. And it takes us to question number 5, when disagreement feels like a personal attack to a narcissist. So if you express a different viewpoint, not aggressively or cruelly, just differently, and suddenly the focus shifts. You're no longer talking about the topic. You're defending your tone, your motives, even maybe your character. And you might hear things like, oh, you're just difficult. You always do this. You just want to argue. And the old survival response might sound like, oh, I didn't mean it like that. That's not what I was trying to say. The response makes sense. Many of us learn that disagreement could cost us connection. So instinctively, we rush to clarify intent, hoping to calm things down and restore safety. The grounded response begins when you feel the shift. You don't override it. You notice in your body first. The tightening, the quickening, the sense that the conversation is no longer about understanding, and instead of explaining, you pause. You recognize this isn't dialogue anymore. This is defense. So you disengage, not dramatically, not punitively, but calmly. Because once a conversation becomes defensive, no amount of clarification will create understanding. So the action point here is do not explain yourself once a conversation becomes defensive. Difference doesn't require permission, and calm withdrawal is not avoidance, it's self-protection. Sometimes the most regulated response is knowing when a conversation has stopped being safe for you. Before I go on, I want to mention a free resource I've made. It's called Unlearning the Rules of a Narcissistic Family, and it's there to support you in making sense of patterns just like these ones without self-blame. If this might be helpful for you, the link is in the description and it's absolutely free. Question number 6, when they can't reflect or change. Why can't they? Well, a situation like this might be that every conflict has the same ending. Every issue points outwards. It's always someone else's fault, someone else's sensitivity, someone else's problem. There's no curiosity, no pause, no self-examination. The old survival response could sound like, maybe I can help them see this. If I explain it differently, something will land, surely. And that response often comes from hope and from responsibility we learn to carry early on, the belief that if we're patient enough, insightful enough, loving enough, growth will happen. The grounded shift begins when you stop recruiting yourself into their growth. You notice the pattern, not as a failure, but as information. You recognize that reflection requires willingness and change requires humility. You stop pushing insight towards someone who isn't open to receiving it, and instead you turn inward. What do I need in my relationships? What feels sustainable to me? So the action point is growth can't be carried by one person alone. You're allowed to step back when reflection isn't mutual, and it's okay to choose relationships that can grow with you. Question number 7, when intent is used to erase impact. So say you name that you are feeling hurt and it's met with, that wasn't my intention. Suddenly the focus is away from how you felt and back into their character. The old survival response often sounds like, I know you didn't mean to, but that response comes from empathy and from a hope that if you soften your experience, it will finally be received. The grounded response begins when you validate yourself internally. You recognize that something is important and that the intention does not cancel the impact. You stop debating your sensitivity. You stop minimizing your pain to protect their self-image. And you say to yourself, what I feel matters, and let that be enough. So the action point is trust your experience even when empathy from the other is missing. Your feelings don't need consensus, and your nervous system deserves protection. Sometimes regulation means believing yourself, even when the other person cannot meet you there. And number 8, when your boundaries are ignored. The situation could be that you say no, you set a limit, and it's questioned, pushed, or reframed as unkind. You're asked to explain, to justify, or to make an exception. The old survival response could be, let me explain why this matters. And that response often comes from fear. Fear that holding a boundary will lead to conflict, rejection, or withdrawal. Now, the grounded response begins when you just simplify it. You recognise that boundaries don't need to be convincing. They just need to be clear. So hold the limit without over-explaining. Let your behaviour do the work. And the action point is state your limits once, then hold them through your behaviour, not through explanation. Discomfort in others does not mean you're unsafe or wrong. A boundary isn't something you argue for, it's something you live by. And the final question, number 9, when they rewrite reality. Well, when something has happened and it's reframed, the details just shift completely. Your memory is questioned, you're told you misunderstood, you overreacted, you remembered it wrongly. So here we can find that we're being gaslit. An old survival response might be, oh, let me prove what happened, let me evidence it. That response comes from disorientation. When reality feels unstable, the instinct is to gather evidence to restore shared ground. The grounded response begins when you anchor internally. You trust your body, your memory, your experience, and you stop chasing agreement. So the main point here is trust your perception and disengage from their narrative, their story, and their control. Clarity doesn't argue, it steps back. And in that step back, you reclaim yourself. If any of what we've talked about today felt familiar, I want to say this clearly. Your reactions make total sense. They're not flaws or overreactions. They were intelligent ways your nervous system learned to keep you safe in situations that didn't offer much room for mutuality. Mutualness. I think I might have that word wrong. You know what I mean. What we've been exploring isn't about finding the perfect response or finally getting someone else to understand you. It's about noticing what happens inside you, trusting that information, and choosing responses that protect your steadiness and your self-respect. Over time, as clarity grows, something shifts. You stop chasing engagement where there isn't capacity. You stop explaining yourself in places that aren't safe. And you begin to feel more grounded, not because the other person changes, but because you are no longer leaving yourself. You're no longer betraying yourself. This kind of healing doesn't happen all at once. It happens in small moments of recognition, making a different choice, and self-trust. And those moments, they all add up. As you move on from this video, take what feels supportive and leave what doesn't. There's no rush, just a gentle returning to yourself again and again. And remember, if you'd like some extra support, my free guide, Unlearning the Rules of a Narcissistic Family, is linked in the description. And so in the next video, we are going to explore trauma bonding and its part in narcissistic relationships. So we can understand what's happening. So it's a really important one. And until then, you take good care. Thanks for being here. Bye for now.